Welcome to another episode of the All Pop No Culture podcast. I'm your host this week, Kevin. Not only am I your host, I am your only guest this week. Nobody else could show up. Everybody was a little busy. I know Andrew is out in Detroit. Jen has to be up crazy early. Kim, I don't know, hates us. She had a reason. Pete's daughter's birthday is this weekend, and Andy is out being Andy. So I didn't have anybody to bring in, so it's just me. But I thought I'd take advantage of this opportunity to talk about some 80s horror films. I watched all three of the major 80s horror franchises, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween. And then a couple of other horror films that I watched this week, The Rental and It Follows. So if you're into horror films at all, definitely give it a listen or give it a watch. And let us know what you think, especially if you are a big fan of those 80s franchises. I'd love to get your feedback on what you thought of the films and which franchise is your favorite. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to share with your friends. We're getting a lot of Facebook sharing going on, and we really appreciate that. So the more the merrier. And I hope you enjoy the show. I spent a great deal of time this week watching or fixing a gap in my horror film history. I like to talk big about having watched horror films and liked horror films, but it's come up a few times that my history is a little weak. I haven't watched or had not until now watched any of the Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, or Friday the 13th films. So this week I had a bunch of work to do for my job where I did not have to talk to people and I didn't have to be in too many meetings. So I was spending a lot of time just working and was able to have stuff on in the background. So I watched the first two of all three of the films behind me. And then later on I'll talk about, I also watched a film called The Rental. And then tonight, right before I recorded, I watched It Follows. So it's been a very horror-filled week for me. But I thought it'd be interesting to jump in and just talk about my experience watching these horror films that are considered classics. And the way that I watched them, I really wanted to watch them before they got too campy. I know that we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but when the lore starts to get silly, you start to lose track of what makes them, pretty decent horror films, and then they become just silly slasher films. So I would say that none of the ones that I watched got to the point where they were silly. I mean, you could argue that Nightmare on Elm Street's a little silly in concept, but it's the only one that's truly supernatural through the first two. But I will also say that in my opinion, what in the order of which one is the scariest to the least scary, or best to worst, maybe, I don't know. But I would say it literally goes in order that we have here. I would put Nightmare on Elm Street at the top, Halloween in the middle, and then Friday the 13th at the bottom. I think, I started with Halloween, and I thought it was an interesting premise. I thought it really kind of worked. You start off with a young Michael Myers. They never really explain, at least in the first two films, why he has to have a mask on, but he stalks and kills his sister right after she has sex, and then kills her. So it kind of sets up that horror movie trope where, if once you lose your virginity, you're going to die. So it is cool. Like you have that opening scene. He kills his sister. His parents find him. We jump to the future. He's in a mental institution and escapes. And then he comes back to town, and you've got all the events unfold where he's essentially stalking Jamie Lee Curtis and trying to kill her. And there's a few kills in this movie, but not necessarily a ton. Like, it's not over the top. Um, it only gets problematic near the end um, when they go to try and kill him. And I mean, he takes a significant number of bullets, um, and he goes down, but then gets back up again, and ultimately disappears at the end of the film. Um, but it was good. Like, I think there's something very cool in the way that Michael Myers stalks his victims, where he's moving slow. He's never in a hurry. Um, it's kind of like he knows he's going to get to you. He knows he's going to kill you, so he's not. It doesn't really matter what gets in his way or how long it takes him. Um, in the first film, especially, he's very stalker-ish. Like, he seems more aware of his surroundings than he is in the second film. Um, in the first film, he's actively trying to not be seen by people, to stay out of the way of things. Um, and go through and be, your semi-typical horror film slasher, but um, like I said, his kill count is relatively low. Um, you get into the second film, which takes place immediately after the first film. And he is now trying to find Jamie Lee Curtis again. And she's been taken to the hospital after the attacks from earlier in the night. So it's still technically Halloween. Um, and this one, leans toward a little more of the traditional slasher, just kind of anybody that gets in his way. Like, he doesn't really care that there's people in the way anymore. Like in the first one, he was making a point that he was trying to, or that he had at least killed his sister. We don't know why he's going after Jamie Lee Curtis yet, but at one point, he kills a girl, steals his sister's headstone, and puts that on the bed with one of the bodies, to kind of say he's out here killing because he killed his sister, and to try to repeat that event. In the second film, we ultimately come to find out that while he's killing all these people, Jamie Lee Curtis has these kind of flashbacks in these dreams, and realizes that, or we find out that she's actually his baby sister, and she was given to another family because Michael Myers, went crazy, killed everybody, and so she's given up for adoption. Doesn't remember much of Michael because she was so young. And so she's kind of off on her own. There's a ton of like kind of cheesy horror movie relationships that start to happen. There's a dude that's kind of got a thing for Jamie Lee Curtis, which is a little weird because they set her up to be so mousy in the first one, and so kind of not anti-relationship, but she was just so chaste in the first one, and this guy is really kind of into her. But they don't, get together. But he's very kind of dedicated to following her around. And ultimately, at the end of the film, Mike Myers gets taken down and burned. What you don't get is any reason why he is as indestructible as he is. Like in the second film, he takes more damage than he does in the first one, and kind of keeps on rolling. And because I didn't want to get lost in the campiness of it, I read about subsequent films, so I guess later on they try to write in a reason for his superpowers, and it's because there's some deal made with a demon, and he has to kill his family to keep his essentially his immortality. Halloween is a series that, again, I haven't watched it. I watched the first two specifically because I didn't want to get into this mess, but Halloween especially branches off in a few different directions. There's a couple of films that take place as if the second film hadn't happened. There's a couple that take place right after the second film. There's a soft reboot somewhere. So the franchise is kind of messy. And along the way, um, it gets really kind of crazy. But ultimately, through the film franchises, um, Freddy actually has the least number of kills per film, which is kind of crazy, especially with these first two. Freddy has 9 films and 39 kills. Michael has 10 films and 124 kills, and Jason has 146 kills over 12 films. Although this does say the kill counts are approximate, so it might not be exactly right, but it makes sense. You know, you can watch, especially, I'll talk about Friday the 13th in a second, but when slasher films become more of a thing, they kind of just start killing anybody that gets in their way. The reasons start to slip away, and they just become, super slashers. Uh, so with Michael Myers in these first two films, he does break out a little bit and start killing more people to get in his way, but um, his ultimate purpose is to get to his, what we find out is his sister, and trying to kill her. So that is Halloween. For the first two films, if I'm thinking about them in terms of horror movies, I mean, I give them a solid 7 or 8. They're, for their time, they were pretty innovative. They were early in the slasher genre. So yeah, so Halloween was the first of these 3 slasher films. If you look for the genre, it goes back a little further. Um, but like Halloween was kind of like the big blockbuster franchise setting slasher film. Uh, Friday the 13th wasn't for 2 more years, and then Nightmare on Elm Street was 4 years after the first Friday the 13th. So jumping in next, I went on to the Friday the 13th films. And I don't know if it's a bummer or not, but I knew at this point the twist for Friday the 13th. If you don't want to know the twist, that's your own fault. The movie's been out for what, 43 years. So you pause here and go watch it if you really care. But the first one was always an interesting one, especially this late in the game. Like with the series out for as long as it's been, the the twist ending in this one is that it's not Jason killing everybody. It's his mother. And so it opens up, there's some kids killed at a summer camp. Um, and so the camp gets shut down. We jump forward 10 or 15 years. I don't remember exactly the time frame, but they jump forward. Somebody has bought the camp. They're revamping it, and they're going to start trying to bring campers back and get ready. So the counselors are showing up, getting ready to do their training and all that. And things start to go sideways along the way. Like immediately, one girl is late, and like she's waiting, she's trying to get there after everybody else, and she picks up a ride from somebody who we don't see. We kind of see it from the driver's angle, and then you see them drive past the sign for the camp, and the girl's like, "Why are we? I think you missed the turn." She gets all creeped out, and they pull the car over, and you see her get from the driver's point of view. So the driver is the murderer. We see her get killed, but we don't know who it is. Now the assumption is, especially if you've watched or if you know of Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th is Jason. Like there's 10 films. There's Jason in the hockey mask and all that. But funny enough, not to bounce around too much, but funny enough, in the first 2 films, Jason does not have the hockey mask. It doesn't become his signature until the 3rd film. So he, anyways, so back at the campground, just kind of goes. Everybody's doing their thing, and they kind of slowly get picked off one by one, and or 2 by 2, depending on who it is. The story kind of starts to circulate about the murders that happened at this place, over time, how this kid, how one kid drowned 15 years ago, and then 10 years ago there was a bunch of murders, so they shut it down. And finally, at the end, where we're getting to our final girl there, um, the battle comes out, and we find out that, like I said, it's not Jason Voorhees that she's fighting, but it's actually Jason Voorhees' mother. And it was her son. Her son was the one that drowned, was the first one to drown. And the reason he drowned is because the counselors were not paying attention. Whether true or not, she believes they were off screwing around and having sex and doing stupid things. And so she has this reason to hate them and hate counselors in general. And when they're up there screwing around and having sex, she blames them for her son, even though it's, retroactive. So she's lost her mind. The final girl, whose name escapes me, I don't think names matter as much in Friday the 13th. But they do battle, and ultimately, our final girl kills Jason Voorhees' mother with a mighty swing of a knife, and chops her head off. And that is the end of the film as we know it. Although at the end of the film, after everything else, she kind of, I don't know what her thinking was, but she shoves herself on a little rowboat and floats out into the middle of the water and waits for the police to show up. And the very last shot of the film is her on the raft. No, I'm sorry, this isn't the last shot of the film. She's on the raft, and the cops show up, and she's kind of waving them over, and then somebody, Jason presumably, jumps out of the water, grabs her, and drags her under. But then it just cuts to a hospital scene, and she's on the bed in the hospital, and they're talking to her, and she's like, well, what about the boy that pulled me into the water? And apparently the cops that were right in front of her didn't see anything. That's a really kind of questionable, funky ending. And I think this was kind of the point where these films, like this one and then Nightmare on Elm Street, were thinking ahead. They were trying to set up franchises, and maybe putting a little too much of a hint into them for the next film. And it wasn't very, it didn't tie to the story very well. It was just a reason to, a reason to move on. So you had this appearance of what is probably Jason, and then, and then the credits roll. So you come back to the second one, and then for some reason, somebody else buys this camp where there was a bunch of murders, and they go through the whole thing again. And, people start getting picked off, and a lot of what we see, again, is through the eyes of the killer. So we don't see Jason for a lot of this film either. By the time we ultimately do, he's got a burlap sack on his head instead of a hockey mask. So we don't really see his face too much in this film. I think we see it once near the end. But yeah, his motivations are less defined than they were in the first one. Other than a counselor killed his mom. But what this one at least intimates is that Jason never actually drowned, that he's been out living in the woods, like totally feral for all these years, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but he's a person, and not a ghost. So as things start to build towards the climax of the film, he's picking people off. There's two people that make it to the end. We've got our final girl and somebody else, and they start to fight off Jason, and she runs into the shed, and she finds out it's kind of like his creepy murder shed. And so you get into the back room of it, and you find out that somehow Jason has his mother's head and her sweater that she wore in the first film kind of on an altar. So it's like he knew his mother was out there and knew her and loved her and knew she died. But in the first film, she didn't know that he was still alive, so she was still killing everything because I forgot in the first film, there's a couple of scenes where you can tell that Jason's mom is crazy because she acts like she's talking to Jason. It's almost like in Psycho, where she talks in her own voice, and then she replies as Jason with kind of like this higher pitched, squeaky kid's voice. Um, and so she's not really um, she's not really all there, but the implication there is that she thinks Jason is dead. But in the second one, Jason seems to know who his mother was, who killed her, all this other stuff, even though he never speaks. And for that matter, neither does Michael Myers um, in the Halloween films. So ultimately, this girl traps herself in this murder shed, right? And knowing that she doesn't have much to go on, like Jason is somehow again kind of like Michael Myers has become this killing machine. Like he is much stronger than he was before, much harder to kill. And so thinking that she doesn't have, and she's got nothing to lose, basically. She throws on Jason's mom's sweater. And when he comes into the room, she starts talking to him like she's his mother, and it kind of messes with his head and messes him up. And so they are able to fight back and fight him off. So all this time, our final girl has been fighting Jason with the boy that she's kind of into, and so after she pretends to be Jason's mom, it confuses him enough that they are able to kind of finally knock him out and get away. And so it seems like they've defeated him. So they're back in the cabin, and it's the girl and the boy. And they hear something at the door. They think it's Jason. They go to the door, they open it, and it turns out it's this dog they've been looking for half of the film, just kind of on and off. And everybody's relieved. She backs up towards the window, and then a maskless Jason comes jumping through the window and grabs her and takes her out of the window. And his face is all disfigured and he's all messed up because he's been through, all the stuff that he's been through. And so this is the only time in the first two films at all that we see Jason and actually see his face. Now, what is totally bizarre is he jumps in this film and he grabs this girl and he takes her out the window, and he's been so hell-bent on murdering everything. But after he does that, it fades to black and then cuts to her outside being wheeled away in an ambulance, shaken up, and maybe a little injured, but kind of fine. And you just don't see the other guy. But it doesn't really make any sense that, Jason jumped through the window and took this girl only to knock her out and then go kill everybody else when he's been on this massive killing spree. So it's this funky, weird ending that kind of, they gave you a jump scare at the end, but then added a little too much after that. Like if it had ended at the fade to black and then rolled credits, I think it would have been a better ending. I'm not sure what the reasoning is for the for that particular ending. It's kind of, I don't know if they were trying to just kind of replicate what they did with the first one, where you see the girl get attacked by what is probably Jason in the water, but then maybe it's just a figment of her imagination, and she's fine. So it's kind of a really funky ending to the second film. But I feel like, having watched the first two of these, I feel like you could probably watch the third one and maybe just start to lean towards the campiness. But at least up to this point, Jason is still a human being. He's still alive, and they didn't kill him. Now, they put a machete or an axe through his shoulder. Like, he's pretty messed up, and without a doctor, he'd probably die, but it's a movie and it's a horror film, so whatever. But it's weird, but it was good. Like, it's a slasher film. Yes, it's just stalking people and killing them. But it was okay. It wasn't too bad. And so next I jumped to Nightmare on Elm Street. Now these ones I hadn't seen, but like, from the jump that Freddy is he's something else. He's not human. He's a monster. He's, you know, something along those lines. And I think that is actually what makes these films slightly better, because you have an explanation, you have a reason for his what amounts to superpowers, right? Like he's completely for most of the film relatively invincible. His rules are a little more clearly stated than Michael Myers and Jason. You don't have to go back and backtrack through a couple of films to write your uh, kind of your monster origin story. So the first film opens up just immediately with Freddy taunting people in their dreams. And so it just kind of hits the ground running. And it's in its own way, it's similar to the other ones, but he has specific targets. And as we find out through the film, as he's killing people in some pretty creative ways, is that you can't get hurt. He can't get you until you fall asleep. So Freddy gets you in your dreams. And he's crazy. Robert Englund is a horror like acting master. Like he's so good at these characters. And Freddy is genuinely crazy. Like, Michael Myers is slow and methodical and just wants to get you to kill you. He's not in a rush to do it. And it's not about torture. He just wants to kill you. It's kind of the same with Freddy. Freddy is literally out there to torture you. Like he wants to drive you crazy. He wants it to hurt. The first film opens up with him making his famous glove. So he's making this thing, and then he chases this girl down. But what we find throughout the film is that if he attacks you in your sleep, no matter where you are, if he hurts you when you wake up from that dream, that injury or whatever he's done to you is there. So it's a trip. Like it's really cool that he goes through and he's kind of stalking these kids, and we don't know why. We don't know why they're one thing we're not given is like his order of choosing, but throughout the film, we ultimately come to find out that Fred Krueger was a child killer. Like he was a psychopath, and he took children to this boiler room and would kill them. And so he was caught and arrested and somehow got off on some kind of technicality, which you can just write into a movie, whether it's realistic or not, right? You don't need a reason for somebody to get away with a crime. So he gets off on a technicality, and all the parents in the neighborhood, all specifically on Elm Street, decide to take matters into their own hands. And what we find out is that these parents, they killed him in his own boiler and then kept his glove. And so our final girl in this one, Nancy, her mom was one of the parents that killed Freddy. And so what we find out is that these kids that are being killed are descendants or children of the people that were the ones that killed Freddy. And so Elm Street is a specific target because that's where these people are from. We have we have all of our battles. We kill all these things. We have some great kills, like Johnny Depp's. This is his first film, I think, and his death scene in this one is kind of an iconic one and kind of cool when you look at it in regard to special effects at the time in horror films. this film got away with being a lot more gory and bloody than um, the first two Halloween and Friday the 13th films because it's supernatural. So there's more blood. You see um, more crazy stuff going on. Um, but one of the iconic scenes that it is really cool is when um, Johnny Depp falls asleep, and Jason essentially you see him get pulled into the center of the bed, and he gets sucked into this hole in the bed, and he's just gone for a minute, and all of a sudden this blood just shoots out of the bed and splashes across the ceiling, but doesn't fall back down. And if you look at it logically, they obviously filmed this upside down and then played the video, right side up, but it looks cool. Like it's got a really cool effect in there. It's brutal. Like a lot of the kills are really brutal. Um, and it's just more of a supernatural horror story. And like I said, it works really well. I mean, Freddy is a great villain because he has this level of crazy. Like he taunts his characters not just with his knives and with the fact that he's killing them, but with his words. He doesn't. Um, he's getting a delight out of it. Where in any other two franchises, it's just kind of about the kill. And so Freddy's sadistic and crazy and psychotic. I thought the kind of the way they beat him was a little corny at the end. Like the girl Nancy is ultimately able to kind of bring Freddy into the real world, and she set up a bunch of booby traps for him, which he falls for and gets hurt a little bit. Kill Freddy. So you go through all this stuff. You finally get to the end of the film, um, and Freddy goes into the mom's room and takes Nancy's mother, who is the last of the parents to have killed him. Um, and then as he takes the mom, he comes back to kill Nancy. She kind of looks at him, says, "I'm not afraid of you anymore. You feed on fear, and I'm not scared." And she turns his back on him, and Freddy goes to attack her, but he kind of, with the 80s special effects as they were super cheesy, but like kind of falls through her and then falls through the floor and disappears, indicating that she's beat him because she's not afraid of him anymore. And that's kind of what he thrives on, is fear. And so you've got this great tied up ending. She goes through all this stuff, and then it just cuts to this weird scene afterwards, which, come to find out, it was added by the studio. It's not what they originally wrote. It's not what Wes Craven wanted the ending to be. But the producers thought they had something on their hands where they were going to be able to make a sequel. And so they added this end scene to kind of leave it more open, and it does not tie into the film. Like, it doesn't work. But what happens is, when Nancy, after Freddy falls to the floor, Nancy opens her bedroom door and walks out and closes the door. It cuts there to her walking out the front door with her mom, who Freddy just took. So you're already kind of confused as to what's going on. It's a bright day. Everybody's happy. All the people that had just been killed pulls up in this car that's driven by Johnny Depp's character. And so they all get in the car, and then it's a convertible. And so he presses a button or whatever, and the top starts to come up. And as the top closes up over the car, you realize it's the green and red stripes of Freddy's sweater. And everything starts to, like, Nancy starts to get a little weirded out because her mom's just kind of smiling and waving and being all weird, but like she knows something's wrong. And as they drive off, Freddy busts through the window and pulls Nancy's mom in, and then the credits roll. And it really kind of ruins the ending of the film a little bit, because it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So now on to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. We open up, there's some kids on a bus. There's a kid at the back of the bus, seems a little awkward. There's a couple girls on the bus kind of laughing at him. It's a school bus, and so they're driving down the road. And then they kind of miss a stop that they're supposed to take, and then the bus starts to go faster and faster and faster, gets caught in this field, and the ground starts to break away. And this boy looks up, and the bus driver is Freddy, and then he wakes up. And we find out is that he is now living in the house that Nancy from the first film lived in and is no longer there. So he is living in the same house on Elm Street that Nancy was in, and he and his family complain about how hot the house is. Even though they've got the air conditioner, so they're going to check that out. The kid wakes up sweating every night. So maybe this kid Jesse is living in the house on Elm Street, and so as time goes on, he starts to have more and more dreams about, and Freddy's coming to him and asking him to kill for him. He says no, but the dreams get more intense over time. And so, much like the first film, he's trying all these different ways to keep himself awake. And so his first kill after he gets in trouble with the gym teacher, like the first kill that seems like it's Freddy, but maybe it's Jesse, is the gym coach. And it's pretty brutal. He gets kind of strung up and killed, and they find him, but there's no implication that it was to anybody on the outside that it was Jesse that did it. Right. And so the way this film rolls is that over time, Freddy gets better and better at taking over Jesse's body. And so, he's trying to hold on. He's trying to keep himself awake, trying to fight this thing off, all while being a teenager and get along with his friends and go to this party and all this stuff. So we have this major party at the end where everybody shows up. And this is definitely where the film, for a little bit of it, kind of gets a little campy. Everything's a little cheesy. Freddy's out there or whatever. But then there's, this cool scene where, Jesse's hanging out with his friend, and literally you see Freddy start to come through his body and come out of his body and ultimately kill this friend of his. And then changes back into him, leaving him knowing that he killed his friend. And when he looks over in the mirror, there's Freddy in the mirror laughing at him. But he's so freaked out by this, he's so scared that he's giving, kind of like we talked about in the first film, he's giving Freddy this power. So that the more freaked out, the more scared he is, the more powerful he becomes. And so, at this point, Freddy's so strong that he kind of breaks out and starts attacking people at this pool party that these teenagers were having. And at this point, he's got full control over Jesse's body. And the girl's dad that this Jesse kid is really into comes out with a shotgun and tries to shoot at Freddy. And the girl stops him because she knows at this point that Jesse is being controlled by Freddy. And even though he looks like Freddy, she thinks maybe he is, still in there somewhere. So we have our final showdown where Freddy is now chasing her around this old factory that he used to work in, the boiler room that he killed the kids in. And so they have their showdown, and Freddy's got her. I mean, she's trying to be tough. She's trying to not be afraid and controlling her own fear to be ready for Freddy. But it's not working. And so Freddy's on the verge of killing her, and she's crying. And then she does this. It's corny, but it works where, she tells Jesse, or she appeals to the Jesse that is still in Freddy. She says, I love you, which, I mean, the setup is pretty weak on that as far as it goes, as a horror film goes. Like, was never really an implication that they were in love or anything like that, but whatever. So she says, I love you. And her love is enough for Jesse to fight back against Freddy. And then Freddy bursts into flames, and then Jesse's ultimately comes crawling out of this body that is Freddy. And for as corny as it is that she all of a sudden loves him, and that's um, enough to kill Freddy and enough to have it work. Um, it it works okay. I mean, for again, for a cheesy slasher horror film, it works. And so it seems like Freddy's been defeated. But then at the end of the film, at the very end of the film, again, kind of like the first film, we have this moment where everybody's on the bus, and everybody's cool. Everything looks fine. All the same people that survived are on the bus. And then all of a sudden it drives off into a field, and we see that Freddy is the bus driver, just like in the opening of the film. And so there's this implication that you can beat Freddy, but only for so long. Um, and it's, again, it's corny, it's cheesy, but at least, like, my complaint with the other two franchises is that both Michael Myers and Jason and his mother are human beings. So why they have super strength and why they can, you know, take bullets like crazy doesn't make a lot of sense. Whereas with Freddy, you immediately know he's supernatural. All of the things he can do are because of what he is. Um, and so it works a little better. So even these cheesy endings where you've defeated Freddy and he somehow comes back, um, still makes a little more sense. I mean, the rules aren't really there. Like, if you can beat Freddy, like, how long can you beat Freddy for if he comes back so quickly? Um, but again, I didn't watch past this film to see if there was more rules down the line. Um, but I kind of struggle with the rules, um, not being established and then kind of being written as they go. But it ultimately works okay. Like, it's not too bad. And so again, because there's some definition to this, because there is a clearer motivation for the things that Freddy does, because he's a genuine psychopath. Like, he's crazy, he's talking to people, he's a little more active than the other two. That's why for me, um the Nightmare on Elm Street is the best of these three franchises. I think Halloween is my second because, again, the motivations are there. The motivations make sense. Not that they don't in at least the first Friday the 13th. Um, but with Halloween, there's something especially creepy about how Michael Myers is so, especially in the first one, is so focused and just isn't in a rush. He just slowly stalks down the street and comes to you, and then um, ultimately kills you. Um, and I thought that was really cool. So, Jason being the last one, and the second, it's the film in the middle, but for me, it ranks at the bottom only because, I mean, I guess he had clear motivations, but he's just hacking people up, and I don't know. I don't know. It wasn't bad, especially the first two films. I do like I said, especially if you're like me, I kind of almost wish I didn't know the twist at the end. So I've already ruined it for you. So I apologize if you haven't seen it. But I wish I didn't know that the first film was his mom, because knowing that there's this guy in a hockey mask for 10 films, when you're seeing it from the killer's point of view, um, knowing that Jason is Jason, you would assume through that whole first movie that this was actually Jason killing people. But I never had that misunderstanding. Like, I knew it was his mom from the get-go. So maybe that's a little more of a cool surprise twist at the end. Um, and then you've got two killers through two films, which is kind of neat too. But there's just something about Michael Myers that I thought was cooler than Jason. So that is my 80s film rewatch, and I have finally filled that gap in my horror film knowledge at least a little bit. I don't intend to watch more of these films. Like I said, if I was going to watch one more of any of these, it might be, well, maybe there's two. I might watch the third Nightmare on Elm Street specifically because Andrew loves it so much. Yeah, the third film is Dream Warriors, and that's Andrew really enjoyed that one. So if I was going to give one of the night, I might go one further in Nightmare on Elm Street and watch that. I have heard it's pretty cheesy and pretty not great. But Andrew loved it a lot, so I may give it a go. And I'm also actually curious about the third Friday the 13th film because Jason is still alive out there. And it's the one where he gets the hockey mask and a few things that make him kind of iconic, right? So maybe we'll see. If I do, I probably won't waste talking about them, but I might give him a shot. So those are my 80s films. I didn't hate them. I thought they were, pretty solid. At least again for them being the first two of each, they weren't too cheesy. So it was a good time. Last night, I found by happenstance a film directed by Dave Franco. It's the first film that he directed. It stars his girlfriend, Allison Brie, Dan Stevens, if you ever watched Downton Abbey, and Jeremy Allen White, who is from Shameless and The Bear. And so the concept, this is a slow burn. It takes a while to get going. It definitely, the first half to three quarters of the film is about the people and their relationships and some weird stuff, but it's not necessarily a horror film right away. But you've got these two couples. So you've got Allison Brie and Dan Stevens are one couple, and then Jeremy Allen White and this girl, Sheila Vand, who I've seen before, but I'm not super familiar with, are the other couple. And so Dan Stevens is Charlie and his wife is Michelle. And then Jeremy Allen White is Josh, and his girlfriend's name is Mina. And Charlie and Mina are business partners who have never had a physical relationship, but they work together. And then Charlie is married to Allison Brie, and Jeremy Allen White, Josh is Mina's boyfriend. And so they all decide to rent a kind of Airbnb kind of thing to get away for the weekend. And so they're driving up to the place, and Mina, her last name is Mina Mahamoudi, I think, or something like that. Something that is, very, a very Middle Eastern type name. So when she tried to rent the place first, they got rejected. And then, 2 hours later, Charlie goes to rent the place, and he gets approved right away. So immediately this girl, Mina, thinks that it is the people renting it maybe are a little racist because they didn't, they saw her name on it. And again, her name is very, very Middle Eastern. And so they maybe didn't rent it to her because of that. And they went with his right away because his name is Charlie and he's super white. So they get there, and the guy that is kind of the groundskeeper for the place, he says his brother actually owns the place, but he's renting it out. And they kind of confront him a little bit, or Mina kind of confronts him a little bit and asks if he's, if he's the racist and whatever. And he's like, no, man, I'm not. Then he offers to bring over a telescope for them to use because it's so clear there. They're on the kind of the California coast, it looks like. And so, they're over there to party and have a good time. So the first night they're out, they, Michelle, Allison Brie's character, pulls out some MDMA and is like, let's, she's like, I know we all said we were going to party real hard. She's like, I have to do something in the morning. so I can't do this, but you guys go ahead and I'll do it again with you guys the next night. And so the other three take the MDMA. Michelle goes to bed. She's sleeping. These three are partying, and then Jeremy Allen White's character, Josh, drinks a little too much on top of the MDMA and passes out. So Charlie and Charlie and Mina are in the hot tub, and they start off innocent enough, making some jokes or whatever. They are switching back and forth between where the jets are, and then they're like, "Oh, we should share the jets," and then they end up making out. Um, and Mina gets a little freaked out. She's like, "I don't, maybe we shouldn't do this." And she gets out of the hot tub and goes in and takes a shower. And while she's in there, Charlie comes in and they end up having sex in the shower. Which, if you're watching even from the beginning, was pretty well foreshadowed that it was going to happen. It's not necessarily that they were right on, way into each other or anything. But as this part of the story continues, we find the couple's kind of split up. So the next day, they're a little guilty about what they did. Plus, they're really messed up from the MDMA and having a longer night than Josh did. So this hike that they were all four planning to do, now Charlie and Mina decide they're not going to go on the hike because they're too tore up from the night before. So just Josh and Michelle go on the hike. So while they're on this hike, they're out there talking about, the relationships and all that. And, Josh is talking about how Mina's too good for him. And then starts talking about his brother, Charlie, and how, he has this pattern of, he's kind of like a relationship monkey where he doesn't let go of one branch until he's, already got his hand on another one. So it kind of comes as a surprise to Alison Brie's character that he was still with his girlfriend at the time before he got together with her. Now they're married. It's been a long time, but, she didn't realize there was this thing going on of him doing this, and he did it with the girl before him also. So he has a pattern of doing this. And so, there's this uncomfortable thing happening there. But back at the house with just Charlie and Mina's going to do something in the bathroom, and she looks up and for the first time realizes in the shower head, there's a camera built into the shower head. And so they're like, we need to call the police. And Charlie immediately is like, we can't call the police because if they figure out where this is and have to have us go over the footage, we're going to get caught having had sex in the shower. So they're convinced that this guy that was kind of the groundskeeper type dude, the brother of the guy that owned the place, put the cameras in there. And so, they're freaking out about this whole thing. And as they're freaking out, Josh and Michelle come back from their hike. And so now kind of there's this uncomfortable thing where these two are now afraid they're going to get caught. Plus they're feeling guilty about it. And then Alison Brie is like, well, she's like, it's my turn to do the MDMA. Who's going to do it with me? And everybody's kind of like, I don't really want to. So she's like, well, fuck you guys. I'm just going to do it. And so she takes it. She goes out to get in the hot tub and it won't start. So she calls up the groundskeeper dude to come fix the hot tub. And while he's there, everybody's outside talking while he's fixing it and doing something. And that Mina girl walks up to him and she's like, let me show you something. And she takes him into the bathroom and she shows him the camera in the shower head. And he seems genuinely confused by what she's showing him. Doesn't seem to know what it is. And so she kind of gets up in his face and he kind of pushes her off because she's getting a little close and a little aggressive. And as that happens, Jeremy Allen White's character walks in, Josh walks in, sees him push her and goes crazy and beats him up in the bathtub, knocks him out. And so they all go outside to talk about this, all the while not giving anything up. Like Charlie and Mina are still, holding this thing close to their chest in a vest and not giving things away. They haven't told them about the camera yet. at this point, they may say that they found the camera in the shower, but they don't give away that they have slept together. So, or had sex in the shower. They didn't really sleep, did they? Um, and so while this is going on, while they're outside kind of talking about this weird thing in the shower, how they should probably call the police, all this stuff, this person that we've never seen before, this comes sneaking into the house behind them and actually kills the guy in the bathtub. So when they come back in, they assume that Jeremy Allen White actually killed him in the shower, rather than, just beating him up and knocking him out in the shower. So, now everything starts to unravel. So she wants to call the police. Um, but now Charlie has another reason to not involve the police. Not only do they not want to give away that they, cheated on their significant others right there with them in the house, but Jeremy Allen White's character has a criminal past. If he gets in trouble, he goes back to jail, and it'll be really bad for him. So having a criminal past, they're not going to take the self-defense thing when he thought he was protecting his girlfriend or whatever. And so, things start to break down. And so now all of a sudden Charlie has this idea, well, nobody knows that we talked to this guy. Let's go dump his body off a cliff. It'll look like he was walking along the cliffside or something and fell in. Terribly unstrategic idea, but plausible or whatever. So while they are doing that, all of a sudden, all three of them, other than Michelle, who's high on MDMA, so she doesn't want to leave, and she doesn't want to be involved. She's like, I think we should call the police, tell the truth, and get this thing cleaned up. I don't want to be involved in your bad people shenanigans. And so while she's left behind at the house, they are off dumping the body. She hears something upstairs and goes upstairs, and on the TV, it's playing the video of Charlie and Mina having sex. So now she knows that while she was there, he cheated on her. So she goes to drive away and drives over some metal spikes, crashes into a tree, and you see her get taken from the car by this guy who's just all in black and now wearing a mask. So now back at the house, after they've pitched this guy over the edge, Josh starts getting text messages from Michelle's phone, right? Because she's, as far as they know, they don't know where she went. He starts getting texts and he starts going through them, and they are pictures and videos of them having sex. So now he's finding out that they had this affair, and so Charlie runs off to look for Michelle. He finds her and is ultimately killed by this masked man. And then while this stuff's going on with Josh and Mina, they're running around the house. He's getting all crazy and mad. They're like, okay, well, we have to find this video anyways. And then the masked man comes in and kills Josh. So Mina's the only one left. And so she starts running away. The masked man is chasing her. She is running. You see her just kind of disappear out of the frame. And it turns out he chased her until she ran off of a cliff in the fog that she couldn't see, which of course is ironic because that's what they wanted to have look like was the cause of death for the groundskeeper. And so this whole thing is, through 3/4 of the film was all these relationships and how they're getting dysfunctional. And then it kind of turns into a slasher film for the last bit. But I think what really ultimately made this film creepy is this very last bit of the film where the guy comes in, unscrews all of the shower heads and takes out the cameras, replaces those, goes through the house and pulls out all these listening devices and all this stuff, and puts everything back together, and then he leaves. And then cut to some, it looks like maybe Airbnb type thing in the city, in some downtown city. And this guy is walking around. He's putting all the stuff into the Airbnb, but at the same time, he makes a copy of the key for the Airbnb. So the implication is that he doesn't he doesn't own, you know, he's not actually affiliated with the original property. He's just a crazy dude who rented it once, set up all this equipment, and then kind of psycho stalked people as they stayed there. So as the credits begin to roll, you see people renting this new place, and he's watching them, because he set up a new kind of stalking ground. And the last shot, of course, is, you know, somebody laying in bed, and you see him kind of walk around a corner and come towards them on the bed like he's going to kill them. Um, but I think it's a little bit of a slow burn in the beginning. The acting is all pretty solid. It's a decent film, but I think what makes it um, kind of special is that it plays with this fear of, if you as a person use Airbnb or use something like that, could somebody be watching you? Could this be happening to you whenever you rent an Airbnb? And so there's a creepy factor there that um, it works really well. It just doesn't come in till the end. Like you're never quite sure who you're scared of for the first good chunk of the film. And then for it to just be some random guy is at first not scary. And then, like I said, at the end is more scary because of the way that he's doing it. So it wasn't a bad film. It was well made. It's definitely more about the situation and the guy than it is about the killings. Like there's nothing that's particularly brutal or over the top. It's not a bloody film, but yeah, it was good. And like I said, if you've ever been to an Airbnb, it definitely raises some questions for you. So that was it was a fun one. And then lastly tonight, right before, actually, there's two films. Number one, I almost forgot. I sat down today and watched Knock at the Cabin. It's now on Peacock. So if you missed it in the theater and you're still curious about it, the M. Night Shyamalan film Knock at the Cabin is available for free if you've got Comcast Peacock, or if you're paying for Peacock, it's on there. Before I say anything about it, I'm not going to jump into it too much because we've talked about it already on the show. And there's some interesting like bits and pieces there. I recommend it. It's worth a watch. And then, you know, if you don't know how much M. Night Shyamalan has fallen from my good graces, I'd say that's a relatively strong recommendation at this point. I think he kind of reins it in on this one. The story, maybe it's because the story isn't his own. He didn't write it. I know that he changed most of the third act compared to the book. The book is actually a lot more bleak than the film, but I liked it. I thought, again, we've already talked about it on the show, but I thought Dave Bautista did a great job. And you know, everybody else was fine. Everybody else was solid. Dave Bautista was definitely like the driving force behind the film. It's not as religious and culty as you might think it is. If you're, you know, if you've seen some of the trailers and stuff. But man, you know, I liked it. What I will say is that there's no huge twist at the end, so Shyamalan didn't have the chance to overthink it. For as much as they, like I said, they changed in the third act. For once, I can say, for the movie-going audience, it's probably a better ending than the book. Now, reading the book, I would have probably been more satisfied with the book ending reading it, and that may not make sense, but for me, it's okay to read a more bleak book, and the ending of the film isn't quite as bleak, but it's definitely interesting the way things kind of start to unfold, and you know, as you watch it, you can kind of see yourself siding with one group of people or the other, and maybe changing your opinions as it goes. But I would say it's the best Shyamalan film in a very long time. Problematic in a few places, but ultimately pretty solid. But then what I did watch tonight is a film that I've meant to watch for a long time. It's been on my list. It's called It Follows, And I think Kim might have talked about it a couple weeks ago, or at least she talked about it in our text chain. And the premise of this movie is that um, this guy has sex with this girl, and he effectively transfers some sort of demon to her, that, or monster or whatever, that is now stalking the person that has most recently had sex. Um, and so it's like a demonic STD almost. And so the way the story unravels, it's a very artsy film. Like, you've got a bunch of those art shots, like overhead, and just like kind of lingering over breakfast. So there's an orange juice, an egg, and a piece of ham, and it sits there for a second, and then it moves on to something, like all these things that are definitely like the filmmaker saying, "Look how artsy I am. I'm so good at making beautiful things." Um, and for me, that was ultimately the killer in this film. It was a little too slow and a little too kind of, I'll just say, up its own ass. Like, it really likes its own beauty too much. I think it spent a little too much time being artsy, rather than focusing on the story itself. You probably could have cut 10 or 15 minutes of that, made a little shorter film, and had to be a little better. But aside from that, the premise is interesting. So what happens is that once you've had sex, once you've had this thing transferred to you, you almost have this Michael Myers like thing where you see something coming towards you. It's just coming towards you. It's not, in a lot of cases, it wouldn't be overly aggressive. It's just walking, maybe at a faster pace than Michael Myers does, but walking towards you. And after this guy first transfers it to this girl, Jay, and so it's all created. It's kind of a date. It seems romantic. They had sex in their car. They were having a lot of fun. He goes in the trunk to do something. She's talking all whimsically. He comes up behind her and he's kissing her for a second. And then all of a sudden he gasses her, or like puts chloroform over her mouth or something, and knocks her out. And the next scene opens up. She's tied to a chair in her underwear, kind of either in this building or under an overpass. And he's walking around with a flashlight, being all creepy. And he's like, "Look, I'm sorry. I just needed to show you this." And ultimately, what it is once he sees it, he brings her over and she can see it too, where there's this entity, this person walking towards them. And he says, and he explains it. And the one kind of flaw, I think, in the film is it doesn't really ever explain how he knows. He just knows that you will see someone coming towards you. It might look like somebody you know. It might look like somebody unassuming, but it's going to be coming at you, and you can't let it catch you. If it touches you, you're going to die. And so, he knows all this information, passes it on to her, and then throws her back in the car, and then drops her off at home, in front of her house. Then so she reports it to the police. Turns out this guy thought she really liked, thought it was a really nice guy, who was just using her to transfer this thing to. He also explained that if she dies, it falls back to coming after him. So like it wants the most recent person to have been infected, I guess. But once they're gone, it starts going back down the line. So as long as she's infected, he's safe. And so he kind of disappears for a while. But when she reports it to the police, it turns out he wasn't who he says he was. This entity that they saw, at least in that scene, was a naked woman coming towards them. What's crazy is, like, he kidnaps her, ties her so he can explain to her what's going on so she'll believe him. But then she kind of explains this to her sister and a couple of their friends, and everybody just seems to just buy what's going on, which is also weird. But the next day at school, she's sitting in class, she's looking out the window, and she realizes there's this old woman all the way across the lawn that's just walking towards her very slowly, but is coming towards her, kind of just walking past people. Nobody really seems to notice her. She just keeps coming towards her. And so, she runs and sees this woman in a couple of different places, and that's how she knows this is real. And so it goes through this whole thing where she is able to convince her friends that this is real. There's this neighborhood guy who's a little bit of a punk, but it's not too bad. Helps her track down this guy that gave it to her. They finally figured out who he was and finds him. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I don't, I don't feel bad." He's like, "I'm trying to look out for myself." And anyway, so he explains, what they have to do. And so this guy, everything goes a little crazy. They're trying to keep her protected, so they go out to this, I don't know, this cabin by the lake or something like that. And they're doing a good job keeping her distracted and keeping her away from stuff. But then it shows up, and they find what happens is something that wasn't explained, and I didn't expect it to happen. But this ghost, this demon thing, is coming up behind her, so she never sees it, and obviously nobody can warn her because they don't see it. But for some reason, rather than grab her and kill her, it grabs her by the hair and picks up her hair. So everybody sees her hair get pulled up. They can't see the ghost, but they see her hair get pulled up. So now everybody's freaked out. They are trying to protect her, and they're running around. And so now everybody's 100% on board. But she freaks out, jumps in this car, and starts to drive away. But as she's trying to get away, a car pulls out in front of her, and she goes running off the road. And she ultimately wakes up in the hospital, having been knocked out. So she's talking to her friends. She's got a broken arm, but she's talking to her friends, and this guy, Greg, who they're friends with, just doesn't buy that this thing is real. So she's like, fine. So she had sex with him when she's in the hospital bed, and at this point transfers it to her. And for a couple of days, he really, he doesn't believe it. But then, one night she's looking out the window, and she sees something walking down the street that she is convinced is the thing. And it breaks the window at his house and climbs into his house and starts to go after him. So she calls the cops and then runs into the house. She finds it upstairs, knocking on his bedroom door, like beating on the door. And she's like, "Don't open the door, don't open the door." And he opens the bedroom door, and it just pounces on him. And at this point, it looks like a woman. It always looks like a person. She goes running in to see what's happening, and he is dead. But this demon, who I guess looks like his mom. And one of the weird things is that it seems like that for some reason, a lot of the times it's just like a normal person walking around, but then the other times it's like a half naked person walking around, or a fully naked person walking around. It's really weird. But she walks into the room, and this now thing that looks like this kid's mom is having sex with him, and he's dead. So it's basically like, I don't know, sexes the life out of him. But now what that means is that she is the main target again. And so she goes running to the house, gets in the car, drives off, and is kind of on the run again. And her friends find her, and one kid that is in their little group of friends, this kid Paul, is kind of nerdy and scrawny. I guess he's always had a crush on the main character, Jay. And she's, he says, "Well, I'll let you pass it to me." And she says, "No." And somehow they come, and again, this isn't explained, but somehow they have this idea of luring the ghost into this big, huge pool. So they drive off into the countryside, into this huge indoor pool, and they take a bunch of electronic devices and plug them in. So their thinking is they're going to throw these electronics into the water and electrocute the demon, I guess. I don't know. And so she's in the pool, and when the ghost comes in, the thing comes in, instead of walking into the water so they can exact their plan, it starts throwing these things that are outside the pool, getting ready to be pushed in. throwing them into the water, um, and trying to like hit her, but without getting into the water. But what we learned through the film is that this thing, while invisible, exists, and so um, they're trying to fight it for her while she's in the pool trying to lure it in. Um, and one girl grabs a blanket and throws it over the top of this ghost, and so now it has a shape of a body because it's under a blanket, kind of like a kid dressing up as a ghost for Halloween. And so one of the kids has a gun and he shoots it, and I don't know, somehow it hurts it and it falls into the water. And it manages to shoot it in the head. And then once it falls into the pool, it grabs her by the ankle, but the kid keeps shooting into the water and ultimately shoots it in the head again. And it sinks to the bottom, and the girl gets out. Um, and there's no body left in the pool. And she looks down, and then there's this really artsy shot of the pool looking like it's filling up with blood or whatever, but no body comes out. So at this point, she's escaped it. She ultimately decides after that to sleep with this kid that had this crush on her, um, knowing like they both understand what it means. And then the rest of like what happens next is a little ambiguous. He's kind of driving down the rundown part of town, drives by a couple of prostitutes. So the implication is maybe, he's going to try and pass it on to somebody else as quick as he can. But I would think prostitutes would kind of be his only outlet. He's not a super fly guy. But and then it cuts back to them walking down the street together, and they're holding hands. There's really I don't know, it didn't really feel like they are actually like into each other. Maybe they're just holding hands because they feel linked together to this thing. And as they're strolling down the street, you see something behind them following them, and then it cuts to the credits. So the implication there is that they're not out of the woods, and that it's still going to be coming for them eventually. It's a decent psychological horror film. I don't think, I don't know. It's a very artsy film, and like I said, what really killed it for me is so much of the time spent on showing you how artsy this film was. I think if it had been just a little faster paced, it might have been a better horror film. I know it's a catch-22, right? Because if you make it too fast paced, then it's just a crazy slasher film. And I do think there was more to this film than that. I think I think it was a smart film. I think it was creative. I think there was the fact that there's a hierarchy of transferring this thing. While I don't love the way they revealed the rules of the monster, like this guy just knew it for some reason, they're clearly established and followed. Why they think they can electrocute it, I don't know. Why it can be hit with a bullet, I don't know. But if it was like I said, if it was any faster paced, it would have been a little cheesy. So, I mean, it worked. It worked. It was not a bad film. I would recommend giving it a watch. It's an hour and 40 minutes. Probably should have been an hour and 30 minutes. But it was good. And if you, I think Kim said it best. She said, it's not, her exact words in our text chain were, the real action happens after the movie. And she said, it lingers. And I kind of get that. Like immediately after the film, before I came to record, I'd take my dogs out. And so I'm outside. And of course, the weather out here in New England has been funky. So it's a dark, foggy night. And there's definitely like this feeling of like, yeah, there could be something creepy out here with me. And I think that works. Like it psychologically can stick with you. So it's good in that regard. But yeah, that's what I've got this week. A whole lot of horror films. If you haven't watched the 80s horror films, I still recommend them. I mean, now having watched them for the first time, I think as long as you understand the era, the special effects, uh, Nightmare on Elm Street relies the most on special effects, but they're not terrible. They work in a lot of cases. Some of them are kind of cheesy. There's a shot where Freddy's arms stretch out super far, and that looks kind of lame. It just looks like arms on sticks. But for the most part, it really, really works. Halloween and Friday the 13th don't really rely on a ton of special effects. A lot of the kills even kind of happen off screen, like you don't necessarily see all of them. So they work kind of well. But they're decent films. If you want to go in and watch an entire franchise, by all means go ahead. But if you're going to watch the whole franchise of these films, you better buckle up. I mean, you're talking about what, 20, 29, 30 films. I think it's a lot. I did 6 and it was a busy week. But not too bad. Like if you're a fan of horror, and if you're a big dumb idiot like me that has left this gap open for this long, definitely go watch them. They were entertaining. I did like them. I can see where the what the hubbub is all about, why they are what they are. So give them a shot. As for Knock at the Cabin, again, really solid. Especially for Shyamalan. I think it was, like I said, his best film in a very long time. And then it follows. Your mileage may vary. If it's too slow for you, it'll be way too slow for you. If you don't mind the pacing of it, if you don't mind that it's a little artsy and kind of, like I said, kind of up its own ass, you might enjoy it. It's a smart film, well made. The acting is not bad, and it worked. So that's what I've got this week. Next week, I think we're gonna do something a little different. So far, that's the plan. I don't want to spoil it yet, but we'll have some fun stuff in there. And so, as always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to share this one out. I apologize for making you endure only me. This is a longer episode of just me than probably anyone I've done before. I try to not do these very often, but I don't like to leave anybody without an episode, just to keep our momentum going. But next week should be a pretty full house. So look forward to that, and have a great week.